My sister demanded my cornea for her model daughter, claiming my job as a programmer does not matter when my sister Karen called me in February. Her voice already carried a sharp edge that told me this was not a casual check-in. She went straight to demanding that I donate my cornea to her daughter Lily, explaining that an infection had damaged Lily's vision and she needed a transplant. I told her I was sorry to hear Lily was struggling and said I hoped she was not in pain. Then I asked the obvious question of why Karen was not stepping forward herself since she was Lily's mother and likely the closest match. Karen laughed like I had made a joke and said I clearly did not understand how things worked. She reminded me she was a professional model and needed both eyes for her career while I worked from home as a programmer, staring at screens all day, so losing vision in one eye would not affect my income or lifestyle in any meaningful way. She said it as if it were a simple fact and not a horrifying thing to suggest. She went on to explain that her face was her livelihood, while my appearance did not matter for my job, that she had contracts requiring her to maintain her look while I had no such obligations. She said it made logical sense for me to be the donor and for her to stay untouched. I felt my stomach twist as she talked, hearing my own sister weigh our worth like items on a balance sheet. I told her she was being ridiculous and that she could not expect me to give up part of my body just because she decided her eyes were more valuable than mine. Karen immediately flipped the narrative and accused me of being selfish. She said Lily was young and had her whole life ahead of her while I was 35 and single, implying I did not need perfect vision to attract anyone. She even said that since I wore glasses, people already knew my eyes were not perfect, so losing vision in one would not change much for me over the next few weeks. Karen called me almost every day with new reasons why I should donate instead of her. She said models needed depth perception for photo shoots while programmers could work with one eye. She said her husband Mark would leave her if she had any facial surgery, but I had nobody to impress. She said I spent all day looking at tiny text on screens anyway, so one eye would be sufficient for my lifestyle. Each call left me more shaken and angry than the last. It felt like she was slowly trying to wear me down by repeating the same cruel logic in different forms, as if persistence alone would make me cave. By March, my parents joined the pressure campaign. My mother called me, sounding serious and disappointed, telling me Karen's modeling career supported her entire family while I only had myself to worry about. She said it would devastate Lily to grow up watching her mother's career fall apart when there was a simple solution available. She urged me to think about what was best for the whole family, instead of being stubborn about something that supposedly would not really affect my life. I asked her why she was not donating her own cornea, and she said she was too old and might not be a good match. My father followed up later saying I needed to step up as an aunt and that Karen had already sacrificed so much as a mother. When I asked him what sacrifices he meant, he brushed it off and accused me of being difficult just to hurt my sister. Mark started texting me articles about how people lived perfectly normal lives with vision in one eye. He said thousands of people managed just fine and I was making a big deal out of nothing. At one point he even offered to pay me $50,000 for my cornea like this was some kind of business deal. When I told him no amount of money would make me give up part of my body for someone who would not do the same for me, he accused me of being greedy and said I was putting a price on Lily's vision. I told him Karen was the one putting a price on it by refusing to donate herself. After that, the tone of the messages turned ugly and relentless. The worst moment came when Karen involved Lily directly. She told her that Aunt Emily did not want to help her see again. Soon I started getting voice messages from a crying 9-year-old asking why I did not love her enough to help. Karen clearly coached her to say that mommy needed her eyes for work, but Aunt Emily just used computers all day. Hearing Lily's small broken voice made me feel sick. A child was being used as a weapon because her mother refused to face her own vanity and fear. That was when I knew I had to stop this in a way that could not be twisted or argued away. I decided to expose the truth Karen was hiding. I called her modeling agency and asked to speak with her manager. I explained the situation calmly and asked whether Karen would truly lose contracts if she donated a cornea to her daughter. The response stunned me. The manager sounded horrified and said no reputable client would punish a mother for helping her sick child. She said it would actually generate positive publicity and reflect well on Karen as a devoted parent. She was clearly disturbed that Karen had been using her career as an excuse to pressure someone else into surgery. The agency contacted Karen immediately and told her they fully supported her donating and would accommodate any recovery time. Karen called me screaming shortly after, accusing me of ruining everything. I hung up and sat there shaking, staring at my desk without really seeing it. The call with the agency confirmed what I had suspected all along. Karen had been lying about career consequences to avoid donating her own cornea. Instead of being ashamed, she was furious at me for exposing her, as if finding out the truth was somehow worse than weeks of manipulation and cruelty. My chest felt tight and I struggled to calm my breathing, realizing how far she was willing to go to protect her image. My phone started lighting up with texts from Karen. About 20 minutes later, she accused me of being vindictive and jealous, said I sabotaged her relationship with her agency when I could have just donated quietly like a good sister. Each message revealed exactly what mattered to her, not Lily's vision and not doing the right thing as a parent, only her reputation and appearance. I took screenshots of everything as the messages kept coming, more than a dozen in the first hour, each one angrier than the last. She said I had always been jealous of her success and could not stand that she was beautiful and famous, while I was just a programmer. Nobody knew. That evening, Mark called me. His voice sounded tired and worn down, completely different from the transactional tone he used before. He admitted he did not know Karen had lied about the agency's position and said he thought the career consequences were real. Then he asked if I was satisfied now that I had embarrassed his wife. I told him I was satisfied that Lily might finally get the help she needed from her own mother. There was a long silence before he said Karen had locked herself in their bedroom and was refusing to talk to anyone. I told him that was not my problem to solve, and he ended the call without saying goodbye. After that, I called my friend Hannah and told her everything that had happened. the daily pressure from Karen, my parents joining in, the money offer, the guilt messages from Lily, and the call to the agency that exposed the lies. Hannah listened quietly and then said something that stuck with me. She said it was unbelievable. They tried to convince me my eyes were less valuable because I was a programmer. She pointed out that my work required intense focus and perfect vision just as much as Karen's modeling did, maybe even more. She said the whole situation was wrong and that Karen's resistance made no sense if her career was never actually at risk when we hung up. I sat alone, thinking about that, wondering what Karen's real objection had been all along. Vanity and fear seemed like the only answers. It did not excuse what she did, but it made her feel more human and less like a cartoon villain. Still, that understanding did nothing to erase the weeks of pressure and manipulation, or the fact that she was willing to sacrifice my well-being to protect her image. I stared at my computer screen for a long time that night, knowing this was only the beginning of a much deeper reckoning within my family, and realizing I had crossed a line I could not uncross, even if it meant finally protecting myself. 2 days after the agency confrontation, my mother called again. Her voice sounded hesitant and uncertain in a way I was not used to hearing. She said she had spoken directly with Karen's manager to confirm what I told her and realized Karen had lied to all of us. She said she felt awful for pressuring me so hard and apologized for not believing me when I said Karen was being unreasonable. But as she spoke, I noticed something hollow in her words. It felt less like she was sorry for trying to force me into giving up part of my body and more like she was embarrassed for backing the wrong story. I told her calmly that her apology missed the real issue, that she believed my body was negotiable for the sake of family convenience and that she assumed my career and appearance mattered less than. The line went quiet and she said she needed time to think. Then she ended the call without saying goodbye. Next day my father called and came out defensive from the start. He said I was being too hard on my mother and that everyone had been misled by Karen's claims about her career. Now that the truth was out, he thought I should stop punishing the family. I told him no one had been tricked by accident. They believed Karen because it fit the narrative they already held, that her needs came first and mine were secondary, that her work and looks were worth protecting and mine were expendable. He accused me of twisting things around and said they were only trying to do what was best for Lily. I asked him again why what was best for Lily had to come from me instead of her own mother. He did not answer and ended the call angry and frustrated. Karen did not contact me directly for over a week after that. Mark sent occasional updates saying Karen had started donor testing at the transplant center and was meeting with coordinators. His messages had an apologetic tone but never included an actual apology. It felt like he was treating the entire situation as something that spiraled out of control on its own, instead of a deliberate effort to break me down. I tried to focus on my work, but found my mind constantly replaying conversations and messages. My chest felt tight most days, and sleep came in short, restless stretches. One Thursday morning, I received a call from the transplant center. The coordinator introduced himself as Daniel Harris and asked if I was still willing to be evaluated as a backup donor in case Karen was not a suitable match. I was caught off guard and asked why they were contacting me at all. He explained it was standard procedure to have a secondary donor identified. Then he added something that made my stomach drop. My name had been listed on the initial paperwork Karen submitted weeks earlier, before she ever asked me directly. She had assumed I would agree eventually and put my information down as if my body already belonged to the process. I told Daniel I needed time to think and he assured me there was no pressure and I could take as long as I needed. After hanging up, I sat staring at my phone, realizing Karen had been so confident in her ability to manipulate me that she filled out official medical forms with my name without consent. The anger I thought had already peaked surged back again. It was not just the demand or the insults. It was the assumption that I would fold no matter what, that my autonomy was a formality she could bypass. Later that afternoon, Hannah came over with coffee and pastries and listened while I explained everything about the backup donor call. I told her I felt torn because part of me genuinely wanted to help Lily, who was innocent in all of this, but another part of me feared that agreeing to be backup would validate the pressure campaign. Hannah pointed out that being a backup donor did not mean surrendering my boundaries. It meant stepping in only if Karen truly could not. If Karen followed through, I would never have to donate at all. She said the choice could still be mine rather than something taken from me. Her words helped but did not erase the discomfort. She suggested I talk to a professional who specialized in family dynamics, reminding me that what I had been through was not a normal family disagreement. That idea stuck with me over the weekend. On Sunday, I searched for therapists and found one named Miriam Shepard, whose profile mentioned working with adults dealing with guilt and family pressure. Her office was close to my apartment and she had an opening that same week. I booked it without overthinking. Walking into her office a few days later, I felt nervous and exposed. But once she asked me what brought me in, everything poured out. The demand, the daily calls, my parents piling on, the money offer, Lily's messages, the agency revelation, and now the backup donor situation. She listened carefully and asked about my relationship with Karen. Growing UPs. I talked. Patterns began to emerge that I had never fully acknowledged. Karen had been modeling since childhood and our parents treated her career as something fragile that needed constant protection. I was the responsible one, the smart one, expected to be independent and understanding when Karen's needs came first. Miriam explained that this dynamic often leads to one child being conditioned to sacrifice quietly. She told me that refusing the donation was not selfishness but self-preservation. Hearing someone validate that broke something open inside me and I cried harder than I had in years. She handed me tissues and said, learning to value myself after decades of being secondary would take time. We scheduled another session and I left feeling shaken but lighter. A week later, Mark texted saying, Karen had completed a full day of testing and was exhausted and anxious. I did not respond. My capacity for comforting her was gone after everything she put me through. The following Tuesday, Daniel from the transplant center called again. His tone was careful as he explained that Karen's tests revealed early signs of a corneal condition in her other eye. It was mild, and she could still donate, but it made her a less ideal candidate. Because of that, the team wanted to proceed with evaluating me as a stronger backup option. Hearing this stirred a complicated mix of dread and vindication. Karen was not the flawless donor she claimed to be, yet the possibility of being needed felt suddenly really asked for 48 hours to decide, and Daniel agreed. As soon as we hung up, I called Miriam and requested a phone session. She helped me separate Lily's legitimate medical needs from my family's manipulation. She said I could choose to help Lily without accepting the narrative that I was obligated or lesser. That if I agreed, it could be an independent decision based on my own values. That distinction mattered more than I realized. That evening, I called Hannah again and asked myself honestly what I wanted if no one were pressuring me. The answer surprised me. I wanted Lily to see again, but only if it happened without erasing myself in the process. The next morning I called Daniel back and agreed to proceed with backup donor evaluation. I told him clearly that I was doing this for Lily and that I would not tolerate anyone framing it as me finally giving in. He said he understood and noted it in my file. After the call, I felt calm in a way I had not felt in months. I had made a choice rather than having one forced on me. That evening my mother called, sounding relieved, and thanked me for being reasonable. I stopped her and corrected the narrative, telling her this was not about reasonableness, but autonomy. There was a pause and she said quietly that she understood, though I was not sure she fully did yet. The following week I went in for my evaluation, filling out pages of medical history and sitting through hours of tests. Machines scanned my eyes with bright lights and humming sounds. Technicians asked about my work habits and screen time. Blood was drawn for compatibility testing. When the ophthalmologist reviewed my results, she said my eye health was excellent and that I would be a strong candidate if needed. Hearing my vision described as valuable and healthy felt strangely validating after weeks of being told it mattered less. I left the center exhausted but steadier, aware that whatever happened next I was no longer powerless. And that realization marked a turning point I could not ignore. The week after my evaluation, I had another appointment scheduled for additional blood work and a consultation with the surgical team. I checked in at the transplant center and sat in the waiting room, flipping through a magazine without absorbing a single word. When I looked up, Karen and Mark were walking through the entrance. My stomach tightened instantly. Karen froze for half a second when she saw me, then dropped her gaze to her phone. Mark gave a stiff nod like he wanted to acknowledge me but was unsure whether he was allowed. Neither of them approached. They chose seats across the room and Karen angled her body away from me, as if physical distance could erase the tension hanging in the air. When the nurse called my name, I stood and walked past them without speaking, leaving them sitting in that heavy silence they created. A few days later, Daniel called me at work to go over my results. His voice was professional but kind as he explained my corneal thickness and overall eye health were excellent. He said all my blood work came back perfectly compatible and medically I was actually a stronger match for Lily than Corinne, due to the absence of early markers for corneal issues. He quickly added that Karen was still considered an acceptable donor and remained the primary choice. The final decision would involve medical guidance and family consent. I thanked him and ended the call, then stared at my screen for a long time, feeling unsettled by the knowledge that I was the better option yet still refusing to step into a role that was never meant to be mine. 2 days later, Karen called me directly for the first time in weeks. Her voice came through tight and sharp. She said she heard from the transplant center that I was a better match and asked if I was pleased about that. I told her I was not pleased about any part of this situation but was relieved Lily had good options. She said she was still going through with the surgery in 3 weeks and sounded like she was daring me to challenge her. I told her that was good and that Lily was lucky to have her mother willing to help. There was a pause and I could hear her breathing change. The anger drained from her tone and something raw replaced it. Karen admitted she was terrified of the surgery, not because of her career or appearance but because she had never undergone any medical procedure before. She said the idea of someone operating on her eye made her physically ill. She had been waking up at night, unable to breathe and imagining everything that could go wrong. Hearing this cracked through my anger in an unexpected way. Fear like that was real and human. I told her it was normal to be scared and suggested she talk to the surgical team about anxiety management. After a moment, she asked quietly if I would consider being the donor instead, since I was a better match anyway. I said no without hesitation. I told her she made her choice when she refused and tried to force me into surgery. Now she had to follow through. Her tone hardened instantly and she accused me of punishing her, of being vindictive and using this to get back at her. I told her slowly that I was not making her do anything. She was Lily's mother and the doctors said she could donate safely. Her fear did not erase the weeks of manipulation or obligate me to step in. She hung up abruptly and I set my phone down feeling completely drained, like the conversation had pulled every last ounce of energy out of me. The next day my father called and launched into the same arguments as before, telling me Karen was having panic attacks and I needed to step up, repeating that my career did not rely on my appearance and that losing vision in one eye would not change my life. I cut him off and told him those arguments were offensive and wrong. My body was not negotiable because I was single or worked from home. I pointed out that Karen had changed her excuse from career damage to fear now that the lie had been exposed. He said I had changed and become cold-hearted. I told him I had stopped prioritizing everyone else over myself. He hung up angry and I immediately scheduled another session with Miriam sitting in her office. I told her about my father saying I had changed. She asked what that meant to me and I admitted part of me worried he was right. Maybe I was being cruel by refusing to help when I was the better match. Miriam leaned forward and said something that settled deep in my chest. She told me I had not changed at all. I had simply stopped accepting a role where my needs came last. My family was reacting to the loss of control, not to cruelty. Their discomfort did not mean my boundaries were wrong. It meant the old dynamic was unhealthy and they did not want to adjust. Hearing that made everything clearer. Protecting myself meant some relationships would never return to what they were. And that had to be okay. A week before Karen's surgery, Mark texted asking if we could meet for coffee. I hesitated but agreed. When I arrived, he looked exhausted with dark circles under his eyes and an anxious energy about him. Once we sat down, he apologized directly for his role in pressuring me and for offering money. He said he treated the situation like a problem to solve instead of respecting my autonomy. His apology felt genuine because he named exactly what he did wrong. I thanked him and asked why Karen had been so resistant beyond fear. He admitted she had built her entire identity around being beautiful since childhood, and the idea of any surgery threatened her sense of self. It did not excuse her actions, but it explained them. We left the cafe with an understanding that did not include forgiveness but did include clarity. 3 days before the surgery, my mother invited me to a family dinner. I declined until she said Lily would be there and wanted to see me. I agreed for Lily's sake. The atmosphere was painfully tense with everyone avoiding the topic entirely. Lily hugged me tightly and asked if I was still mad at her mom. I told her grown-ups sometimes disagree, but that I loved her and none of this was her fault. Later, she asked quietly if I was going to give her my eye because her mom was scared. My heart broke hearing that she knew. I told her mom was being brave and helping her. That being brave did not mean not being scared. She seemed comforted by that and showed me drawings about seeing clearly again as I was leaving. Karen stopped me and offered an awkward apology that felt rehearsed and performative. I thanked her but did not say I forgave her. Disappointment flashed across her face and she walked away. The next day, Mark texted that the surgery was scheduled for early morning. I wished them well for Lily's sake and waited, unable to focus on anything. Around noon, he messaged that the surgery went well and Karen was in recovery. The transplant would happen the next morning. Relief washed over me mixed with lingering anger. Doing the right thing at the end did not erase the harm done along the way though. Following day, Mark sent updates as Lily went into surgery. When he confirmed it was successful, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief. Knowing Lily would regain her vision mattered more than all the bitterness and conflict. A few days later, my mother called hinting that Karen was struggling emotionally and could use support. I told her I was not ready to comfort someone who had not truly acknowledged what she did. She sighed and ended the call. 2 weeks later, she asked me to lunch, just the two of us. Saying she wanted to talk honestly, something in her voice sounded different, so I agreed, not knowing that this conversation would begin to shift the ground beneath our entire family dynamic. When I met my mother for lunch that Saturday, she looked nervous in a way I had never really seen before. She kept adjusting her napkin and glancing around the restaurant like she might change her mind and leave. We made small talk at first about work and traffic and the weather. Then she set her fork down and took a deep breath. She admitted she had been thinking constantly about everything I said during our last phone call. She told me she realized how often she expected me to be the understanding one while Karen was treated as fragile and in need of protection. She said she had convinced herself it was necessary because of Karen's career and identity. But watching me stand my ground forced her to see how much she dismissed my needs over the years. Her voice shook as she said she finally understood how unfair that was hearing. Her acknowledged that favoritism out loud softened something in me that had been clenched for months. She asked what she could do to repair our relationship going forward instead of assuming things could return to normal. I told her I needed her to stop expecting me to sacrifice myself for Karen's benefit. I explained that rebuilding trust meant treating both daughters as equally important and respecting my boundaries even when that made family situations uncomfortable. My mother's eyes filled with tears and she squeezed my hand across the table. She said she wanted to do better and that she was sorry it took something so extreme to open her eyes. I left that lunch feeling cautiously hopeful for the first time since February. A few weeks later, Mark began sending me updates about Lily's recovery. The first photos showed her smiling with a protective eye covering and giving a thumbs up. Each message talked about how much clearer things already looked. As the weeks passed, the updates showed her reading signs from across the room and drawing pictures with details she could not have seen before. One message included a drawing of butterflies with intricate patterns and bright colors. I stared at it longer than I expected and felt genuine happiness for her. Whatever anger I had still carried about the adults involved could not outweigh the relief of knowing the medical outcome was good. Karen did not reach out to me directly during that time. Mark mentioned she recovered physically but was struggling emotionally and felt resentful about how hard the process had been. He also said she was upset that I had never thanked her for donating. I told him calmly that doing what a parent is supposed to do for their child did not require my gratitude, especially after months of manipulation and lies. He acknowledged my point without arguing and kept future messages focused on Lily, which worked better for both of us. Out 6 weeks after the surgeries, my father called saying enough time had passed and the family needed to move forward. He wanted to plan a gathering so everyone could put the drama behind them. I told him I was willing to attend family events, but only if moving forward meant healthier boundaries rather than pretending nothing happened. He complained I was making things complicated, but eventually agreed to host a barbecue and said I could come if I wanted. I spent days debating whether attending was a mistake, but decided Lily mattered more than my discomfort. When I arrived at my parents' house, the atmosphere was stiff and overly polite. Everyone seemed careful about their words. Karen stood near the grill with Mark and barely glanced my way. My mother hugged me tightly and whispered that she was glad I came. Then Lily ran across the yard and threw her arms around me. She excitedly pointed out signs and flowers she could see clearly now. Watching her joy made the tension worth enduring. Later, Karen and I ended up alone on the back porch for a moment. She told me the agency had featured her donation in a campaign about devoted mothers, and that the publicity had actually helped her career. She admitted quietly that I had been right about the career consequences being exaggerated, and that her fear was always about the surgery itself. It was not a full apology, but it was the closest she had come to accountability, I told her. I understood being afraid of medical procedures, but that it did not justify pressuring me or using Lily to guilt-trip me. She looked down at the porch boards and said she wished she had handled things differently. I nodded to acknowledge her words without offering forgiveness, and we returned to the gathering in silence. Over the next few months, I kept my distance from Karen while spending more time with my mother and Lily. My father stopped making comments about my job or appearance being less important, though he still bristled when the topic came up. Mark checked in occasionally and apologized again for his part, which I appreciated because it showed growth. I continued therapy with Miriam every other week, learning how to maintain boundaries without cutting people off entirely. She helped me recognize manipulation early and shut it down before it escalated. I noticed a shift in myself as time passed. I trusted my instincts more and felt less responsible for managing everyone else's emotions. That change made family interactions less draining and more manageable. Even when they were awkward several months later, Mark mentioned Karen landed new modeling contracts and that her donation story had become part of her professional image. Parenting magazines praised her sacrifice and devotion. The irony was not lost on me, but I chose not to comment. I realized I did not need her to learn the lesson I wanted her to learn in order for me to move on. Focusing on what I could control gave me peace I had not felt before Thanksgiving came and went without incident. My mother respected my boundaries and even defended me when my father joked about me being difficult. Hearing her speak up for me felt surreal and healing. Karen and I remained polite but distant, which I accepted as the healthiest version of our relationship. Hannah commented one afternoon that I seemed more confident than before. She was right. Standing up to my family and surviving the fallout showed me I could handle disapproval without losing myself as winter settled in. I reflected on how much had changed since that first phone call. My relationship with my mother was stronger and more honest. My father had begun to acknowledge his mistakes. Lily was thriving with her restored vision, and Karen and I existed in a truce that protected my peace. I learned that family obligation did not mean surrendering my autonomy and that protecting myself was not selfish. It was necessary. Those lessons stayed with me as the year drew to a close, preparing me for whatever conversations and boundaries still lay ahead. 6 months after the surgeries, I found myself sitting at my desk late, one evening watching lines of code scroll past without really seeing them. My mind drifted back to how everything began and how much had changed since then. The anger that once felt constant was no longer burning in my chest. It had faded into something quieter and more manageable. I could think about those early weeks without my heart racing. That alone felt like progress. Lily was thriving, and that mattered most. Her vision had improved beyond what the doctors initially predicted, and every update reminded me that the medical outcome was worth the struggle even if the emotional cost had been high. My mother started calling me every Sunday afternoon just to talk. Not to ask for favors or push family agendas, but to genuinely check in. She asked about my projects at work and listened instead of waiting for her turn to talk about Karen. Once she even mentioned reading articles about programming languages so she could understand my job better. Hearing that nearly stunned me. Those small changes added up and made our conversations feel balanced for the first time in my adult life. She also stopped making comments about my appearance or my relationship status, which lifted a quiet weight I had carried for years. Mark continued sending updates about Lily, photos of her reading chapter books and proudly holding up art projects filled with tiny details she could finally see clearly. He sometimes vented about Karen obsessing over minor flaws in the mirror or spending hours getting ready for simple errands. I kept my replies neutral and kind, but brief. When he hinted about wanting advice on handling her vanity, I told him gently that I was not the right person to help with his marriage and suggested he talk to a professional. He accepted that boundary without argument and stuck to sharing Lily news after that. The elementary school art show arrived in early spring. The cafeteria walls were covered with student work and Lily grabbed my hand the second I walked in, pulling me excitedly toward her section. She pointed out every drawing she made and explained the tiny details with pride. One butterfly sketch had intricate patterns she never could have drawn before. Karen stood nearby, documenting everything on her phone for social media. The constant filming irritated me, but I reminded myself that at least she showed up and seemed engaged. Lily's excitement was real, and that was what mattered. Not long after that, my father asked me to lunch. We met at a small diner near my apartment and made awkward small talk before he finally apologized. He admitted he was wrong to say my career and appearance mattered less. He said he had always expected me to be the easy daughter who did not need much while Karen got special treatment because she seemed more fragile. His voice cracked as he said he was proud of me for standing up for myself when the whole family pushed back. I accepted his apology and felt a sense of closure. I did not realize I needed. Karen's career surged in the months that followed. Her agency leaned heavily into the narrative of devoted motherhood and sacrifice. She gave interviews and appeared in campaigns that praised her decision to donate. Seeing those articles felt surreal given how hard she fought against the surgery. But I chose not to challenge the story publicly or privately. I no longer needed validation from her or anyone else. Her version of events did not have the power to define my reality anymore. In therapy, Miriam helped me understand that acceptance did not require approval. I could accept that Karen might never fully acknowledge the harm she caused and still move forward without resentment controlling my life. That insight changed how I approached family gatherings. I showed up when I wanted to, and stepped back when I needed space. I stopped over-explaining my decisions and trusted that no was a complete sentence. The confidence that came from that shift surprised me. At a family dinner later that year, Lily asked why I did not give her my eye, like her mother did. The table went quiet, but I answered calmly, explaining that parents have different responsibilities to their children and that her mother did the right thing in the end. Lily nodded thoughtfully and said she was glad her mom was brave. Karen stayed silent and focused on her plate. The moment passed without drama and I felt proud of how I handled it. By the end of the year, family interactions felt different. Not perfect but healthier. My mother respected my boundaries and defended me when needed. My father was more thoughtful with his words. Karen and I maintained a polite distance that kept the peace without reopening old wounds. Hannah remarked again that I seemed more grounded and sure of myself. She was right. Surviving that intense period taught me that I could handle conflict without losing who I was on New Year's Eve. I sat with Hannah reflecting on everything that had happened since February. I realized that standing up for myself when everyone opposed me was terrifying but necessary. I protected my autonomy and showed my family that my boundaries mattered. Lily received the care she needed from the right person, and my relationships evolved in ways I never expected. The experience reshaped how I viewed family obligation and self-worth. As the year turned, I felt calm and confident, knowing that whatever challenges came next, I could face them without sacrificing myself again.